In the quiet village of Umuokoro, where mornings began with the smell of roasted corn drifting through the air and evenings settled into the sound of distant crickets, there lived a young man named Monday Okorie. He was not known for wealth or strength or wisdom, but for something far louder than all of those combined. His mouth. Monday could talk. He could turn a small event into a grand tale, a simple idea into a dream that sounded already accomplished. And for months, there was only one story he repeated everywhere he went. He was going to Canada. He spoke about it as if it had already happened. At the market, he described snow falling on his shoulders, even though he had never seen it. At the barber shop, he explained Canadian streets as though he had walked them. At gatherings, he spoke of a new life waiting for him beyond the ocean. And slowly, people in the village stopped arguing with him and simply listened with amusement or quiet doubt. Monday, however, believed his own words more than anyone else did. Soon, talking was no longer enough. He began to borrow money. At first it was small amounts, then larger ones, and then anything he could convince people to give. He borrowed from traders, from mechanics, from teachers, from friends who trusted him, and even from widows who sold akara and pap just to survive each day. To each of them, he promised the same thing, that when he reached Canada, he would send back money, blessings, and gratitude. His voice was so confident that even those who had doubts found themselves hoping he might be telling the truth. But Monday was not preparing a future for anyone else. He was preparing an escape for himself. With the borrowed money, he bought a fake designer suitcase, an oversized winter jacket he would never need in the heat of Nigeria, snow boots that had never touched snow, and a phone he claimed was for international communication. He held on to these items like symbols of a life he had not earned yet. The village watched him with a mixture of admiration, confusion, and silent concern. The night before his departure, Monday threw a small celebration. Music filled the air, palm wine flowed, and laughter echoed through the village square. He danced, proudly telling everyone that next time they saw him, he would speak with a foreign accent and send money back in dollars. The widows prayed for him sincerely. The youths cheered him on. And beneath all the celebration, something unspoken lingered, as if the land itself was watching and waiting. At dawn, the entire village gathered to send him off. Children ran beside him, women waved cloths in the air, and men clapped him on the back as he walked toward the bus that would take him away. He wore his thick winter jacket under the burning sun, sweating heavily, but refusing to remove it because it made him feel important. He took photos, posed dramatically, and blessed children as though he were already a man of international status. Then the bus arrived, and he boarded with confidence, waving as though he was leaving behind a world he had already conquered. The journey began smoothly, but as the bus approached the border between states, something strange happened. The air inside the vehicle shifted. It became heavier, quieter, almost watchful. When the bus slowed near the boundary, Monday suddenly felt an unseen pressure around him. The bus moved forward, but his body felt disconnected from it, as if something was refusing to let him pass. When he stepped down, he tried to cross the invisible line ahead of him. The moment his foot touched that space, he was thrown backward violently as though an unseen force had rejected him. The passengers screamed, in confusion. The driver stopped the bus in fear. Monday stood up, shaken, and tried again. Each attempt ended the same way. Forward movement turned into sudden rejection, as if the road itself had become a barrier that only he could not cross. Fear spread among the people watching. Some began to pray, others ran away, and a few recorded the strange event with shaking hands. An old woman selling oranges nearby watched silently before speaking in a low voice, saying that the land does not forget what a man owes. Her words carried a weight that made the air feel colder, even under the hot sun. Then something deeper began to unfold. Monday felt a pressure in his chest, and his thoughts became loud with memories he had tried to ignore. He saw the widows' faces again, the money he took, the promises he made without intention to keep them, the confidence he used to disguise dishonesty. The invisible force was not just blocking his body, it was confronting his conscience. He realized in that moment that he was not being stopped from going abroad. He was being stopped from escaping accountability. Shaken and broken, Monday returned to the village in silence. The same people who had celebrated him now watched him pass without applause. There was no anger in their eyes, only disappointment and disbelief. He locked himself away for days, refusing to eat or speak. The weight of what had happened pressed heavily on him, not as punishment alone, but as revelation. When he finally emerged, something in him had changed. He began walking from house to house, returning every borrowed coin, no matter how small. He apologized repeatedly, even when words were not enough. Some forgave him quickly, others hesitated, and some refused entirely. But he did not stop. For the first time, he was not speaking to impress anyone. He was speaking to make things right. To repay his debts, Monday began working. He carried heavy blocks at construction sites under the harsh sun. He washed cars until his hands ached. He worked on farms, dug soil, fetched water, cleaned gutters, and even sold his belongings. The man who once spoke of easy foreign success now lived a life of steady, humble labor. Each day he worked was a step away from who he used to be. Months passed, and slowly the village began to see a different Monday. Not the boastful dreamer, but a quiet worker. Not the man who promised riches, but the man who returned what he had taken. He did not ask for recognition. He only worked. One day, after repaying nearly everything, he stood before the last person he owed, an elderly widow named Mama Nkechi. She was the oldest and kindest among them. Monday knelt before her and placed the final repayment in her hands. His voice shook as he apologized, and for a moment, silence filled the space between them. Then she placed her hand gently on his head and blessed him, telling him to go in peace because his path had finally opened. That night, Monday felt something lift from within him. Not a physical burden, but something deeper, as if a chain he had carried for years had finally broken. The next morning, he returned to the same border where he had once been rejected. The air was calm, the sky clear, and the road quiet. He stepped forward slowly, cautiously, expecting resistance, but nothing stopped him. No force pushed him back. No wind rose against him. No unseen voice spoke. He simply walked across. But this time, he did not go to chase a fantasy. He went to build a life. He worked in the city, learned discipline, saved money, and grew into a man who no longer depended on stories to define him. Years later, when he eventually traveled abroad, there was no arrogance in his voice, no borrowed confidence, no exaggerated dreams, only quiet purpose. And in Umuokoro, the story of Monday became something people told not to laugh or judge, but to remember, because they learned that a man can try to leave his land, but he cannot outrun what he owes until he faces it. That was the story of Monday, and why he never reached the airport until he first reached the truth. Time passed in Umuokoro, but Monday's story did not end the day he crossed the border. It only changed shape. In the city, life was louder, faster, and less forgiving than the village. Monday learned quickly that survival there did not respond to talk or confidence. It responded to effort. So he worked. At first, the jobs were small and humiliating. He carried loads heavier than his pride. He cleaned places he had once walked past without noticing. He washed cars in traffic so long his fingers cracked from soap and water. But unlike before, he did not complain. He simply worked. There were days he almost slipped back into his old self. Days when he would see men dressed sharply speaking big English and remembered how easily he once created versions of himself that were not real. But each time that old version tried to rise, he remembered the invisible force at the border, the way the land had rejected him not out of cruelty but correction. That memory kept him grounded. Months turned into years. Slowly, Monday changed. His body became stronger, his voice calmer, his words fewer but heavier. People in the city began to notice that when Monday spoke, he did not exaggerate. He stated what was real and left what was not unsaid. That alone made him trustworthy. One afternoon, while working at a construction site, a man in a clean shirt and tinted glasses came to inspect the project. He watched Monday carry blocks without complaint, sweat running down his face, eyes focused, movements steady. Something about his discipline stood out. After asking a few questions, the man offered him a small opportunity. It was not glamorous. It was not travel. It was supervision work under strict conditions. Monday accepted without hesitation. It was the first time in his life he was given responsibility, based not on words, but on consistency. That opportunity became a turning point. He rose slowly, step by step. No shortcuts. No shortcuts even when they were offered. When others tried to bribe their way forward, Monday refused. When others lied to get easier positions, he stayed where he was assigned. It was as if he had made a silent agreement with life itself. He would earn everything properly, no matter how long it took. Years later, Monday was no longer the man struggling in the dust. He had become someone people consulted, someone younger workers respected. But he never forgot where he came from. Every time he passed the construction sites, he remembered the man he used to be. Then one morning, something happened that stirred the past again. A letter arrived. It was from a travel agency informing him that his long-pending visa application had been approved. He was being invited to travel abroad for work training and expansion. For a long moment, Monday simply sat still. Canada. The word he once used like a toy now stood in front of him like a test. But this time, he did not celebrate. He did not run around telling people. He did not start imagining snow or foreign streets. He simply read the letter again and again in silence. That night, he could not sleep. Not because he was excited, but because he was afraid of who he used to be. The memory of his past self was more frightening than the journey ahead. In the village of Umuokoro, news also spread quickly. People who remembered the old Monday reacted differently. Some were surprised, some were skeptical, some even feared that the same pride that once blocked him might return. Mama Nikichi, the old widow, only smiled when she heard. "He is not the same man," she said softly. "The land has already tested him." But Monday himself was not so sure. As the departure date approached, he began to notice strange things again. Dreams that felt too real. Nights where he would see himself standing at the same border, stepping forward and being pushed back. Voices in his sleep repeating the same phrase he once heard: "You will not leave until you are clean." He did not tell anyone. Instead, he worked harder, as if staying busy could silence memory. On the morning of his departure, he traveled to the airport alone. No crowd followed him, no cheering, no celebration, only quiet footsteps and a small bag in his hand. The airport was larger than anything he had ever seen. Moving people, loud announcements, glass walls, metal detectors. Everything felt like a different world. For a brief moment, the old Monday tried to rise again inside him. He saw an opportunity to impress strangers, to exaggerate his journey, to become something bigger in their eyes. But this time, he caught himself before the thought became speech. He remained silent. At the check-in counter, the officer looked at his documents, then at him, then back at the screen. Everything was in order, yet something about the waiting felt heavier than usual. As he stood in line for clearance, he felt it again, that same pressure, not physical, not visible, but familiar. His heartbeat slowed. He looked around, expecting something strange to happen. But nothing was obvious. People walked normally. Luggage moved forward. Voices continued. Everything appeared fine, and yet, inside him, something was shifting. When he finally reached the final boarding checkpoint, he stopped, just for a moment, not because he was blocked, but because he was remembering. He remembered every lie he told, every widow he looked in the face and deceived, every promise he made without intention to keep, every version of himself that existed only in his imagination. For the first time, he realized something important. The force that once stopped him at the border was never about geography. It was about identity. He closed his eyes, and silently he spoke, not to anyone around him, but to himself. I am not that man anymore. When he opened his eyes, he stepped forward. Nothing stopped him. No force, no wind, no rejection. He walked through. For the first time, the journey did not resist him. On. The plane, as it lifted into the sky, Monday did not feel like a man escaping his land. He felt like a man leaving behind an old version of himself. He did not look out the window with excitement. He looked with gratitude, because now he understood something the younger version of him could never understand. Travel was never the miracle. Transformation was. When he arrived abroad, life was still not easy. The cold was real. The work was demanding. The environment was unfamiliar. But Monday no longer fought reality with imagination. He faced it with patience. He worked again, quietly, consistently, without noise, without performance, without lies. And slowly, life responded. Years passed again. One winter evening, standing outside a building covered in snow, Monday received a video call from home. It was the village youth. The children he once joked with were now grown. They showed him Umuokoro, still the same in many ways, still alive with laughter and dust and morning markets. Then Mama Nkechi appeared on the screen. Her face was older, but her eyes were still kind. "You left properly this time," she said. Gently, Monday smiled. "I did not leave," he replied. "I arrived." After the call ended, he stood alone in the snow for a long time. The cold no longer felt strange, it felt honest, and in that quiet moment, he finally understood the full meaning of his journey. Not every blocked path is punishment. Some are correction, some are preparation, and some are mercy in disguise. Back, in Umuokoro, the story continued to be told, but differently now. Not as the story of a man who failed to reach the airport, but as the story of a man who had to meet himself before the world would open for him. And every time it was told, the village ended it the same way. A man can cross oceans, but he must first cross himself. Years settled over Monday's life like soft layers of snow he had long stopped being surprised by. What once felt foreign became routine. What once felt like struggle became rhythm. But even in the calm, there were moments when the past tapped lightly on his mind, not to disturb him, but to remind him. He had built a stable life abroad, not flashy, not loud, but steady. He worked in logistics coordination at a mid-level company, overseeing movement of goods between warehouses and distribution centers. It was the kind of job that rewarded discipline more than charm, and for the first time in his life, that suited him. People respected him not because he spoke well, but because he showed up early, stayed late, and solved problems without drama. There was no version of him that needed exaggeration anymore. He had nothing to prove. Yet there was one place he had not returned to in his heart, Umuokoro. Not because he hated it, but because he feared what memory might still be waiting there. One evening, after years abroad, he received another message from home. This time, it was not a call. It was a recording. A village gathering, children laughing, elders speaking. And then, unexpectedly, a familiar voice began narrating his story. They were telling it again, but differently. Not as a warning anymore, as a lesson. Monday listened silently as the recording played. The story had evolved in his absence. He was no longer the boastful man who was stopped at the border. He was now the man who learned, rebuilt, and returned differently. But something inside him tightened as he listened. Because stories, he realized, have a way of freezing people in time, even when they have changed. That night, he could not sleep, not because he was troubled, but because he felt something unfinished. A quiet thought began forming in him. It was not about travel. It was not about success. It was about return, not physically, but meaningfully. For years, he had sent money back, home, quiet support, anonymous contributions. School supplies, small infrastructure help through trusted contacts. But he had never returned as himself. He had never stood in front of the people who knew the old version of him and shown them the new one. Weeks later, he made a decision. He would go back to Umuokoro, not as a visitor, but as a man who had nothing to prove. When he told his colleagues, they were surprised. Some asked why he wanted to go back to a place he had already escaped. But Monday only smiled. I'm not going back to escape anything, he said. I am going back to close something. The journey home was quiet. No grand announcement, no emotional build-up, just movement. When he finally arrived in Nigeria, the air hit him differently, not as something he left behind, but something he had outgrown and still belonged to. The road to Umuokoro felt shorter than he remembered, or maybe he had simply changed. As he entered the village, people began to notice. At first, they were unsure. Then, they stared longer. Then recognition slowly formed. Whispers spread. Is that Monday? But this was not the Monday they remembered. No oversized jacket. No loud confidence. No borrowed arrogance. Just a calm man walking steadily through familiar dust, carrying only a small bag. Children followed at a distance, curious but cautious. Adults watched from doorways, unsure whether to greet him as the old version or the new one. He stopped at the junction where it had all begun, the same place he used to speak loudly about Canada, the same place he had borrowed promises from the air, the same place where words once meant more than truth. Now he stood there quietly, no speech, no performance, just presence. One by one, people gathered, and then Mama Nkechi arrived. Older now, slower steps, same eyes. She looked at him for a long moment, without speaking. Then she nodded. So you came back, she said. Monday bowed his head slightly. I never really left, he replied. I only changed direction. A soft silence settled over the crowd. Then something unexpected happened. A young boy stepped forward. Uncle Monday, he said, is it true you were stopped at the border by spirits? Some villagers laughed, quietly. Others leaned in, waiting for his answer. Monday looked at the boy, then at the crowd, then at the ground for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was calm. What stopped me was not spirits, he said. It was truth I had not yet faced. The crowd went silent. For the first time, there was no myth around his story. No exaggeration, no fear, just understanding. Mama Nkechi smiled faintly. Then tell us, she said gently. What did you learn? Monday took a slow breath. He looked around at the place that had shaped him, broken him, and rebuilt him, and he answered honestly. I learned that running can take you far, he said, but it cannot take you forward. Forward only. Comes when you stop lying to yourself about who you are. No one interrupted him. Not because they were shocked, but because they were listening in a way they never had before. He continued. I thought leaving the country would change my life, but I had to change my life before any place would accept me. The border did not reject me. I rejected responsibility first. The wind moved gently through the village as he spoke. Even the noise of daily life seemed to pause. After a moment, Mama Nkechi stepped closer. You have returned whole, she said quietly. That is what matters. Monday nodded. But then he did something unexpected. He turned to the crowd, and instead of apologizing again, instead of defending his past, instead of trying to rewrite it, he simply said, if anyone here is still waiting to run from something they have not faced, don't wait for a wall to stop you. Stop yourself first. No drama, no performance, just truth. Years later, the village would remember that day more than the day he left, because leaving had been noise, but returning had been silence with meaning. And that is where the story truly ended. Not with a man escaping his land, but with a man finally no longer needing to. Back abroad, Monday continued his life quietly, but now, every decision he made carried a different weight. He no longer chased appearances. He built consistency. He no longer spoke to impress. He spoke to clarify. And sometimes, when snow fell at night and the world grew still, he would remember Umuokoro, not as a place he escaped from, but as a place that taught him how to become someone worth returning as. And in the village, when children asked about him, elders no longer said, "He was stopped at the border." They said something simpler. He found himself before he found the world. And that was enough, because some journeys are not about where a man goes, but who he becomes before he gets there. If this story stayed with you, don't just move on from it. Reflect on it, share it, and subscribe for more powerful African storytelling that reveals life, choices, and transformation in ways you won't forget.